Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to episode 4 of the MyJournal Fullstack series. Hope you're doing well, and I hope you've been enjoying these past couple of videos. Last lesson, I showed you how to create the HTML portion of our application, and inside of the HTML front end, we can now create post objects by punching in some text inside of here and here, hit the submit, and we get a new post object all the way down below. So today's lesson, what I would like to do is to show you how we can consume all of these post objects being printed out using the post endpoint right over here. We want to take all of these objects and put them inside of our iOS application right on the left side here. And basically we want to slowly transform this guy into something that looks a lot nicer. And you see our post object right here with the title, the body. See the title, the body, and also down here the same format as well. Okay, so that's what we are going to do with our iOS application. Let me just move the HTML out of the way here. And what I've gone ahead and I've done already is I've created a brand new project inside of Xcode. And every time I launch this bad boy, we get a table view controller. It's basically this guy right here. Table view controller has the title of post. And then we have handle create post being handled right here. So let me hit this a couple of times. You'll see this being printed out all the way at the bottom. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and assume that everyone watching right now already knows how to create a table view controller. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to consuming the JSON data, which is right over here at this endpoint. And then I'm going to present all of this stuff inside of my vertical list right here. So how exactly do I do this? Well, I'm going to use a decodable object. So let me just create that right here with a struct and post. This guy will be a decodable like that. I think I want to actually declare 3 properties. The first one is the ID of integer. And then the second one is the title, so the title, and I think I also want the body as well. Let these guys be strings. So ID, title, and body is what I want. And for the most part, that's all I need. And let me just move that out of the way. Okay, with this post object, I want to somehow fetch it and then put it all inside of this table view controller. So for example, I want to do something like this, like let's say post equals an empty array of post objects. Somewhere down here, maybe I need number of rows in section, return post.count, like that. And then maybe cell for row at, I need to return some kind of cell. So let me just say, let cell equals UI table view cell. And this guy, maybe we want to use the subtitle nil and return the cell object. Okay, so we need something like this. And before we can actually show this inside of the controller, the post objects, we need to fetch them from the actual localhost 1337. So let me show you how I want to do that. Inside of view did load, let me just say fetch post as a function. Let me create this somewhere up here. So file private, function fetch post, and inside of here I'm going to call some kind of service class, so service shared and fetch post, something like this with a completion block, right? And how exactly do I do this? Well, I'm going to declare everything in one file because it's a lot easier for me to do this. Service ns object, and let's say static let shared equals a singleton object of the service function, and let's say what is it, fetch post, and we need a completion block here. And then this completion block will be something that looks like that. Okay, so with all that code being written out, I should be able to get this guy to look a lot better. So let's say fetch post, and this is what we want here. And then we need this as well. And so this looks a lot better. So let me try to build. And what you can do now is inside of the actual singleton fetch post function, I actually want to execute the JSON decoding. So first I need to fetch my objects from the localhost, which is right over here. I'm going to assume that a lot of you guys know how to do this already. So I'm going to type this out rather quickly. URL string is this right here. And then I need to say else return. And what else do I need to do? I need to execute a URL session, share data task with completion. Let's use this one and use the URL. And for this guy, hit enter data, response, and error. Okay. And finally, I need to say dot resume. And inside of here, I should have some data. So you obviously need to check the error. So just check this first and print fail to fetch post. And maybe you want to print the error out as well and just return. So I don't think I'm going to run into this. And what I really want to see is what's inside of the data that I get back from this actual fetch request. So why don't we just say print out string and data, and we can do encoding as well. Let's be a little bit safer about this. So gar.let data equals data else return, and make sure to spell that correctly. And we have the data here, and the encoding is UTF-8. Now this guy's optional, so I'm going to coalesce it into this guy down here. Okay, so with all that being written out, I'm going to run this app again, and we should fire off this request and hit this breakpoint right here. The error should be nil, so I should be able to get to that statement down here. And let me just hit that one more time, and you'll see what the string of the data actually looks like. It's pretty much the exact same thing as what we had in the browser right here. So that looks pretty darn good. And now what I want to do is with the data here, I'm just going to comment the string out, and instead of here, I can execute a JSON decode. So let me do a JSON decoder and decode some kind of object. Now, before I perform the decode, one thing I'll mention about this local host right here is that we are not using HTTPS. So this is the secure protocol, and I'm just using a regular HTTP, non-secure. If you have to, let's see, if you want to fire off a non-secure request, you have to enter the app transport security setting here, and then make sure that you have NS allows local networking as yes. If you don't have this, then the actual local network operation doesn't work. So make sure to just type this out. It should be pretty easy. So let me just hit back here. And now what I can do is for the actual decoding process, let me see what I want to do. So do, and let's say post right here. I'm just going to type this out really quickly. I think you guys have seen this before. So let's say try that. I'm going to decode the post.self as an array. And then the data is right over here. And then finally, I will completion block with the actual post object. Now let me just type out the catch right here, completion with maybe the potential JSON error. Okay, so some of this code is not going to work just yet because the completion block right here, so this completion block is declared to not take any parameters, so make sure to use @escaping or the compiler is going to complain. This guy, maybe I want to use the result of, let's say, array post, and then the error, something like that. This result, I believe, is okay. Whenever you declare a result like that, this is with 5 codes. It might look a little foreign, but this is what you need. We need the success with the actual post object, so post like that. If we get an error, we just say completion block with a failure, and then the JSON decoding error, which is this guy. So this guy is an implicit error that gets caught right over here somewhere. And what you can do now is build your project, and you can try to run again, but your code isn't exactly complete yet. Let's say .fetch post again, get the completion block, hit enter, you get your result. And to actually test your result, you want to do switch on this actual result, case of .failure, and you can say, let's kind of see what's happening here. So let error, I believe this is what I want, and print out fail to, let's see, fetch post, and print out the error like that. I think I need a comma here. And then let's also declare the case of success as well, and let post be something like that, and print out my post objects. So I'm going to try to run my project again now, and you'll see that the fetch process was actually complete, and we're printing out all of the objects down here. You'll see that we have an array of post objects. We have ID, title, and eggs, and sausage, and so on and so forth. So instead of actually printing all this stuff out, you'll see that, let me just run this example one more time. We are fetching the actual post, and then eventually we fire off this completion block here. So if you go back in the stack trace, we are right here. And at the very end, we are at this breakpoint there. Now, next thing I'll do is, you see I have this array of post objects. I can simply go ahead and do this. So I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to say self.post equals the post objects here. And then I also want to say table view.reload data, like that. Now, currently I'm executing the fetch on a background task. So whenever you do that, you have to make sure that you get back on the main thread. So whenever I'm fetching this stuff inside of the service right here, right? Whenever this stuff is done, I want to say dispatch queue.main.async. Inside of here is where I want to include all this code. Hopefully you guys are aware of how this works by now. Pretty simple iOS concepts here. Once you run this again, the purple complaint will go away. And now the table is reloading. So the last thing I need to do is for cell for row add, I have this empty-ish cell. So what's really going on is you can say background color equals .red. You're going to get about 3 or 4 different objects right here. So instead of doing that, we are going to say cell.textLabel.text equals, let's see, let post equals post index path.row. And here is the post dot title right here, and then cell.detailLabel.text equals post.body. All right, so let me try to run this now, and you'll see that what's happening is I was able to fetch all of the post objects inside of localhost 1337 at post, this endpoint. These are the JSON objects. I fetched them using a standard URL session code inside of my service singleton. And once I fetch all of them, you can see that they're being rendered out using a detail or a subtitle cell inside of cell for row add. And we're just simply setting the text label here for the actual text. So what it looks like is pretty much this right here. So breakfast, eggs and sausage, and lunch, dinner, dessert, and so on and so forth. So it looks pretty good. Okay, so as you can see, fetching JSON data from a server is really easy, right? I went through this code pretty quickly because I'm going to assume that a lot of you guys have seen this process probably 1,000 times by now. The next thing I want to move on to is actually creating a post object and then inserting it into this list somehow. The way I'm going to do that is to make sure that I hook up the proper logic inside of this create button right over here. So you see creating posts is down here. So how exactly do I want to hit the server and execute a post request is what I need to do, right? So basically in the Chrome browser, this guy right here, so AAA, BBB, this is sending a post request to the server. Let me bring you back to the server. So I'm inside of terminal. If I hit submit right here, you can see that I should get a post request right here. So I'm actually hitting that. And I want to show you how to do that inside of iOS right now. Pretty easy stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make another call to the service class. So let's say shared. I'm going to call create a post with some kind of title and some kind of body as well. So I don't have this function defined yet. Let me go ahead and create it somewhere inside of the service class. Let's see. What do I want to do here? I think I just want to go back to my view controller. And I think I want to say function create post with some kind of title, and this will be a string. So spell that bad boy out correctly, and string as well. I think for the completion block, I think I'm going to use something a little bit easier. So let me just use a optional error and do that. Okay. So the reason why I can just use an optional error is because I don't really need an entire array of post objects. So let me just use that really quickly. Now what I want to do is to actually execute a post request instead of a standard GET request like this. And this is actually very similar, but just a tad different. What I'll do is I'm going to execute something very similar. So I think I just want to grab this guy. So let's grab the URL. The actual endpoint is post without the s, so I'll just do that. And the next thing I need to do is to declare something called a URL request. So var URL request, and this guy is a URL request. You need to feed in the URL. For the actual request, there is something called HTTP method like this, and you just want to say post like that. You might want to use all caps. I don't think it matters. But once you do that, you can execute the same URL session, shared and data task with URL request, and use the above URL request. Now, some of you guys might want to use Alamo Fire, which makes this process a little bit easier, but I don't exactly want to download the entire Alamo Fire to do something as simple as this. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the native URL session. The completion handler, hit enter here, data, you get your response, you get your error, just like so. Make sure to fire off this guy with the resume. I always forget this, so make sure you don't forget that. And inside of here, you can just do print. I guess I will print out the data again as a string. So data and encoding. So data is that. So let's say guard let data equals data, else return. So return, and this guy will be UTF-8, something like that. Okay, and let's kind of see if I run this, what will happen. I think I need to call create post, which is down here. So create post. Whenever I hit that, I want to say dot create post. So the title, I'm going to say iOS title. So this is just some dummy data for now. iOS post body, and enter. Get the error right here. Check the error. If let error equals error, print failed to create post object, and let's print out the error as well and return. Otherwise, we have maybe print out finished creating post. Okay, so just some standard code right here. Let's actually see if we can hit the server. So create post, and you'll see that I have a uses error. Invalid new record details missing value for required attribute title. So if you look in the terminal, you can see the same thing as well. So let me bring back this terminal here. So it looks kind of like this, right? Maybe this is a little bit easier to see. If I go back to, maybe I'll put this guy over here, create post, you'll see that same error, which is coming up right here. And basically, whenever we create a post object, we need a title and a post body, right? We aren't exactly sending that into the server by using create post right here. So we have access to title and body, but we're not putting it onto this request. So maybe this is a little bit easier to understand. On the request, there's something called an HTTP body that is sent along with the request. So you need to set this as some kind of data object like this. So what exactly is the data? Well, let me just type out the code. You can Google this as well. I don't exactly remember every time. And what you need to do is to use JSON serialization and data with object. And for the actual object, I'm going to create something called params. And this guy will be the key of title, and I'll use this title right here. So get that from the actual function parameter. The next thing is, I think I called it post body for the actual body parameter. So I'll use post body as a string, and we'll put body from the parameter right here. And then next I need to say params right here. And this guy, I think you can just use init. I think that's fine. So this right here, you can't call this because it will require a do catch. So let's do this really quickly over here. So I'm gonna say let data equals all of that. I think you need a try in front of this. And let's say catch right here. And let's say completion with the potential error of the JSON serialization. Okay, so all of that looks pretty good. I'm going to cut all this code here and then move this guy right here. The data is actually this, so the body is the data, and that looks good. If you try to run this, I believe you'll get the same error. So let me see what the printout is down here, create post, and you'll still see invalid new record and missing value for the title. So this took me a couple of tries to figure out, but basically, for the actual URL request, you need to also set a header of JSON. So make sure to do this as well, application JSON. And this guy, I believe, is content type like that. So let me try to run this again. Don't ask me why the code looks like this, but this is just standard HTTP convention code. I found a lot of this code on Stack Overflow. Okay, so now let's finally create the post right here. You'll see that we get something else that looks a lot different. Basically, our post request is being redirected to the home. That's kind of why it looks like this big blob of HTML code. But once you have all this executing correctly, if you run your application again, you'll see at the very last row of your table view, you'll have this new post object. Okay, so that's basically how you execute a create post request. So instead of just having this guy do nothing, let's try to refresh our table. So this is the service create post function call. What I'm going to do is, instead of printing out the string, I'm just going to do this right here. So completion, and I'm going to call this completion block with a nil because maybe I don't have an error, but obviously check the error and complete with the error if you want to. I'm not going to go through all that code, but that's basically how this is done. Make sure for the completion block, you need the @escaping and build. This looks okay. I might not even need the data. Obviously, you do the correct checking right here. The last thing I'll do is whenever I hit this create post button, it's going to complete, and whenever I'm completed, with the process of creating the post, I'm just going to say self.fetch post again, and I'll try to run this code yet again, and let's kind of see what it does. So create post, and we have iOS title right there. If I modify this to be whatever 444 and 5555, I'll try to run this again. Instead of having the iOS title and the iOS body, we are going to see 444 and 5555, just like so. Okay, so the last thing I would like to do for my iOS application right now is to introduce the ability to actually delete one of these post objects, right? So what you're seeing in the browser right now, if I refresh, are all of these objects here. If I hit the delete here, you see all those posts kind of go away. And then if I restart my iOS application, those previous post objects are now gone from the stack. For the iOS app, what you can do is you can actually swipe these cells left and right to execute some custom behavior. For a table view controller, you can say commit and use this one right here. If editing style is the delete, then we are going to do something different. So print, let's say delete post, like so. Let's kind of see if I can write this code out. I just want to see if I can swipe now. So swipe introduces the delete button right here, and hitting the delete will actually execute this code there. Okay, so I want to see if I can write this delete request really quickly. Basically what I want to do is some kind of service, and then say maybe shared and delete post with some kind of ID. And this ID is going to come from, let's see, let post equal self.post, my array. We have the index path from above here. And then for this guy, the post ID should be something like post and ID, I believe. So this guy, I believe, has a row. And we need to execute some kind of code like this. So how exactly do we do this? Well, I need to write my service delete, which is somewhere over here. Obviously, you are going to refactor all this code into separate files, but for the video purpose, this is a lot easier to write out. So how do I want to do this? Well, let's say function and delete post. This guy will have the actual ID of the post ID, which is an integer. And then we'll have a completion block very similar to what we have here. So let me just copy this code. So copy that, and let's see, I'm going to end right here and paste all of that code right over here. Okay, so the URL is going to be the same. The only thing that's different is I think I want to execute a delete request here instead. I don't think I want to pass in all these parameters. And the other thing that's different is for the URL, I think I'm using something that looks like this. So it's the post and then the ID. So let's see, this is going to be the ID right here. And that's my delete request. I don't need this parameter stuff, and I think I should be okay. So let me just grab this code and just paste it all the way over here. And I think this should work out correctly. And what I'll do is I'm going to do this right here. I'm going to check the error. So if let error equals error and print out. Maybe I don't want to print it out. I'm just going to say completion with the actual error and then return. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this application. I'm going to try to swipe, but before I can do that, I think I need to rewrite the delete post function, pass in the ID of post.id. Completion will be entered, and error if let error, so error equals error, print fail to delete, and let's say return like so. If all of this is okay, that means I have a success to print out successfully deleted post from server. Okay, so I'm going to expect to see either this or this, and maybe I can use a colon, and error. Okay, so running this one more time, let's kind of see what we have. I have a warning up here, so that data is fine. Now what I'll do is I'm going to execute the actual delete right here. Let's try to delete this last one right here. So delete, and this looks okay. Successfully deleted post from server. I'm going to go into the HTML browser. So I deleted this last one. Let's refresh to see actually if it went away. So it looks like that is gone. And the thing that we have to do in the actual iOS app is whenever we delete this, right, we need to actually delete it from this row as well. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can execute a self.fetch post and reload the entire table, or you can do something like a self.table view, and you want to delete a particular index path. So the one that I'm swiping on is going to be this one. So let's just grab that, put it inside of an array is what it expects, and use .automatic for the animation. I think you also want to say self.post. You want to remove it from the array as well. So index path.row. So I know I'm going through this very quickly, but the logic is pretty self-explanatory, I hope. Let me try to delete AAA from the server, hit the delete, and once that is deleted, it should go away. It did disappear, but it flagged us with this main thread error again. What you can do is go back to the service and just remove that code. This guy, maybe you want to wrap it in some kind of dispatch queue. Main.async, and then wrap all this code here and just type it out. So copy and paste, and you can just rerun your code again. Everything is going to occur on the main thread. So let's delete this guy right here. So hit delete, and you see it kind of disappears like so. Delete. You can run your app again, and you can confirm that all of the post objects are now gone. So that's basically the entire feature of creating and deleting and reading the posts from the server. One thing that you do have to be really careful about is sometimes when you delete things or when you create things, the server actually doesn't respond with an error. So this error right here is actually whenever the server isn't able to actually talk with the client. And sometimes your server will just, not deal with the actual deletion or creation correctly. And then what will happen is the response will be something like a 404 or maybe like a 400. So let me show you what I mean. Basically, if you remove this guy and you try to fire off a delete request without the ID, then the server actually doesn't delete the object. So I'm going to try to delete this guy right here. You see it does disappear, but you actually have an error. You see that the dessert actually comes back. And basically, whenever you fire off that delete, you are actually hitting this 404 right here because we don't have the ID. So whenever you hit a 404, you have to be very careful to catch it correctly. The way you catch these things is you can say if let response equals this object is the response. So you say response as an HTTP URL response, and you check the response.status code. If this is not equal to 200 or some kind of, 302 or maybe a 300 value, I'm going to check if it's not 200, then I'm going to complete with an error. So the error is going to be NS error. You can use domain, and I don't really care what you use for the domain. Let's use the response.status code for the actual code. And this guy, you can use whatever you want. I guess you can say NS description key, localized description key, and maybe you want to use the string as some kind of object. So you need a string right here. And let's say let error string, let's error string. I'll just do this really quickly. It's a string, and I'm going to grab it from the actual data. Right here, I'm going to grab it from this. This guy's optional, so maybe you want to do this, maybe this, I don't know, whatever you want, UTF-8. And this guy is also optional, so let's no coalesce all this stuff so that we don't have to deal with the optionals and just, paste that in here. Finally, don't forget to return, otherwise you'll execute this successful completion. So what I'll do now is I'm going to run this delete one more time. So delete right here, and you'll see it still says successfully deleted post from server. And why exactly is that is the question here. And that's because I actually brought this ID back. So let's just remove that again. And I'll try to run my code, and you'll see that whenever I try to delete this, it's going to flag an error down here, failed to delete, and you see that we have not found a 404. So make sure you type this code out inside of the creation as well, and you should be good to go. There are some cases that I'm not handling perfectly, but for the most part, this is how you interact with your server using post and delete and also a get request. And this process is pretty standard across many different iOS applications. Again, you can use AlamoFire if you want, but for basic request code such as this, I think writing out the URL session code is pretty okay by its. at the very least, it's very good practice to type this out yourself. All right, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you want to download the source code for this iOS project, make sure to head down in the description below to find the source code link. And I will probably see you in the next video where we create a user registration screen for our server and the HTML side as well. Hopefully I'll see you then. Bye bye guys.